Worcestershire sauce. You probably can't spell it. You probably can't pronounce it correctly. And yet it's been in your kitchen your entire life. A dark, thin, intensely savory liquid in a narrow bottle. A few drops go into a Caesar salad dressing. A splash goes into a Bloody Mary. It shows up in steak marinades, meat pies, Welsh rabbit, and the base of dishes you wouldn't immediately associate with the word fermented. It tastes ancient, complex, like something that evolved over centuries of culinary tradition. Here is the actual origin story. A British nobleman returned from Bengal in the 1830s and asked two chemists in Worcester, England, to recreate a spiced sauce he had tasted in India. They made a batch. It tasted terrible. They put it in a barrel in their cellar and forgot about it. When they found it months later and tasted it again, it had transformed, fermented, deepened, become something entirely different from what they had originally produced. That accidental fermentation is real. And it is genuinely interesting. But what happened next is what this video is about. The two chemists, John Wheeler Lee and William Henry Perrins, recognized that they had stumbled onto something commercially valuable. They patented nothing. They trademarked the name. They fought competitors in court for decades. They eventually sold the business to a conglomerate that maintained the mystique of the original recipe as a trade secret, a secret so protected that allegedly only a handful of people in the world know the full formula. The recipe is not what they're protecting. The story is what they're protecting. And the story is worth significantly more than the recipe. The origin story begins with Sir Marcus Sandys, a former governor of Bengal, though some historians dispute his exact identity and title. What is consistent across accounts is the colonial framing. A British official returns from India with a taste memory of a fermented, spiced sauce and wants to recreate it at home. He commissions a local apothecary firm in Worcester. That firm, run by John Wheeler Lee and William Henry Perrins, attempts to recreate the sauce from Sandy's description or from a recipe he provides. The first batch is unacceptably harsh. Raw, pungent, dominated by the sharpness of unfermented anchovies, tamarind, and vinegar. Inedible. They store it. Time passes. Months. Possibly over a year. Here is the chemistry. The sauce contains anchovies, small, oily fish that are extraordinarily rich in free glutamates and inosinate. When these proteins are exposed to the acidic environment of vinegar and the enzymatic activity of the fermentation process, they undergo autolysis. The cellular proteins break down, releasing free amino acids. The primary amino acid released is glutamic acid, the compound that produces umami, the fifth basic taste. Simultaneously, the tamarind, a fruit with high concentrations of tartaric acid and sugars, undergoes Maillard-adjacent browning reactions in the acidic, temperature-varying environment of the cellar storage. The molasses deepens. The spice compounds mellow. The clove and mace volatiles interact with the acetic acid environment and form ester compounds that create the characteristic warm, spiced aroma. What Lea and Perrins found in that barrel was not what they had made. The fermentation had created a fundamentally different product. The autolysis of anchovy proteins had produced one of the highest concentrations of naturally occurring MSG in any commercially available condiment. Worcestershire sauce is, at its chemical core, a naturally produced glutamate delivery system. It makes everything it touches taste more intensely savory. This is why a few drops of Worcestershire in a stew or a marinade produces a flavor amplification that seems disproportionate to the volume added. Lea and Perrins began selling the sauce commercially in 1837. They applied their names to the bottle. They worked with John Wheeler Lee's grocery contacts and established distribution through pharmacies and food shops in Worcester, then London, then nationally. The product spread quickly. The dark glass bottle with the original paper label and orange wrapping became a recognizable visual identity. The name Lea and Perrins was on the label. But the product name, Worcestershire sauce, was descriptive. It named the county. It could not be trademarked. This was the fundamental strategic vulnerability. Any producer in Worcester, or anywhere else, could make a similar sauce and call it Worcestershire sauce. And they did. By the 1840s and 1850s, competitors had emerged. Some made reasonable facsimiles. Some made inferior products under the Worcestershire name that were thinning the brand's reputation. Lea and Perrins fought back. Their legal strategy was to pursue counterfeit claims, specifically targeting bottles that imitated the visual design of their label, their bottle shape, and the orange wrapping. While they could not trademark the source name, they could protect the specific visual trade dress of their packaging. This is an early example of the trade dress protection strategy that modern food brands use extensively. The Heinz bottle shape. The Tabasco diamond label. The specific visual identity of a package that is legally protectable even when the product name is not. Lea and Perrins spent decades in litigation protecting the visual identity of their bottle against counterfeit operations, primarily in the United Kingdom and the United States, where the sauce had also become popular through export. They did not always win, but the litigation itself was strategically valuable. It sent a message to potential competitors that replicating the Lea and Perrins product identity was expensive and legally risky. The American market is where Worcestershire sauce's commercial trajectory became exceptional. The sauce entered the American market in the 1840s, initially through import by grocers catering to British expatriates and to American consumers with an interest in British products. The timing coincided with a period of significant British cultural influence on American dining habits. American ship captains and merchants were among the earliest adopters. The sauce was found in ships' mess kits because it was shelf-stable, intensely flavorful per unit volume, and could improve the quality of preserved meats and tinned goods that dominated maritime food supplies. Here is the commercial mechanism this created. Sailors who had used Worcestershire sauce at sea returned home and sought it at grocery stores. It became associated with a specific use case, improving the flavor of preserved or low-quality protein, that had broad appeal in an era when refrigeration was limited and much of the meat that middle-class households consumed was salted, cured, or of inconsistent quality. Worcestershire sauce did not make bad meat taste good, but it made mediocre meat taste significantly better. The glutamate concentration in the sauce produced the same flavor enhancement effect in a cheap beef stew that a skilled cook could achieve through hours of stock reduction. It democratized umami. By the 1880s, Worcestershire sauce was one of the most widely used condiments in American households. Lea and Perrins held the premium position. Dozens of American-produced competitors had emerged, typically marketed as Worcester sauce, dropping the Shire to avoid potential trademark complications. The Lea and Perrins product held its premium because of the trade dress protection, the authentic origin story, and, critically, because the genuine fermented formula was actually better than most of the competing domestic products. The fermentation chemistry produced a complexity that was difficult to replicate quickly or cheaply. Here is the corporate strategy that transformed Worcestershire sauce from a successful condiment into a cultural institution. The recipe was made a trade secret. Not immediately. The basic composition of Worcestershire sauce, anchovies, tamarind, vinegar, molasses, onions, garlic, salt, sugar, and spices, was generally known. The specific proportions, the specific sourcing of ingredients, and the specific fermentation protocol were not published. Over time, Lea and Perrins and their successor companies cultivated the mystique of secrecy around the formula. The exact proportions were known only to a small number of people. The specific tamarind variety, the maturation time, the barrel specifications. This mystique served multiple commercial functions. First, it prevented direct replication. A competitor who knew the general composition but not the exact formula could not produce an identical product. The trade secret created a quality barrier that was difficult to overcome through reverse engineering alone. Second, it created a narrative value that was commercially exploitable. The story of the secret recipe, known only to a handful of custodians, protected for generations, the result of an accidental discovery, is inherently engaging. It implies authenticity, heritage, and irreproducibility. Third, it justified premium pricing. A product with a secret formula commands a higher price than a product whose formula is fully disclosed. The mystery is part of the value proposition. This is the same strategy that Coca-Cola has deployed with its formula since the late 19th century. The recipe may or may not be genuinely secret. Multiple chemists have published close approximations of both Worcestershire sauce and Coca-Cola's formula through reverse engineering. But the mystique of secrecy is itself a marketing asset that generates media coverage, consumer curiosity, and premium brand positioning at no additional production cost. In 1930, Lea and Perrins, the family partnership, sold their Worcestershire sauce business to HP Foods, a British condiment manufacturer. HP Foods was subsequently acquired, ultimately becoming part of H.J. Heinz Company. Heinz, the same company whose ketchup regulatory maneuvering we have examined in detail, now owned both the most dominant American condiment and the most distinguished British one. The acquisition gave Heinz the Lea and Perrins brand, the trade secret formula, and the century-long brand equity built by the original partnership. The Heinz management of Lea and Perrins followed a predictable pattern. The original recipe was maintained. The original bottle design was preserved. The original origin story, the colonial India connection, the accidental fermentation, the Worcester chemists, was consistently promoted in marketing materials as a mark of authenticity. What changed was scale and distribution. Under Heinz's global supply chain, Lea and Perrins Worcestershire sauce expanded into markets that the original partnership's distribution capacity could never have reached. The institutional presence of the Heinz distribution network placed the orange wrap bottle in grocery stores across dozens of countries where it had previously been an import specialty. The production of the fermented anchovy base was also industrialized. The traditional fermentation process, months of barrel aging, was optimized for commercial consistency. The specific fermentation parameters that the original partnership had developed empirically over decades were codified and standardized. This industrialization maintained the quality of the product, while enabling the volume that global distribution required. But it also transferred the institutional knowledge from the hands of specific craftspeople to a documented manufacturing protocol owned by a corporation. The secret recipe was no longer secret in the same way it had been when it lived in the memory of the Lea and Perrins family. It was a proprietary manufacturing specification. The mystique was preserved. The mechanism had changed. One element of Worcestershire sauce's production that deserves specific attention is the anchovy. The Peruvian anchovy fishery is one of the largest in the world. Peru accounts for approximately 10 to 15% of global fish catch by weight, the vast majority of which is not consumed directly but is processed into fish meal and fish oil for animal feed and aquaculture. But a portion of the Peruvian anchovy catch, along with anchovies from the Mediterranean and Southeast Asian fisheries, is processed into a fermented paste or sauce that serves as the primary flavor base for Worcestershire sauce. The fermented anchovy component is not manufactured by Lea and Perrins. It is sourced from specialist fermented fish product manufacturers, and is itself the product of a fermentation process that takes months. This creates a supply chain dependency that is somewhat unusual in the condiment industry. The primary flavor compound in Worcestershire sauce, the glutamate-rich fermented fish protein, cannot be manufactured quickly. Lead times are long. Supply is subject to the volatility of global fisheries. Heinz has managed this supply chain dependency through long-term supplier relationships and ingredient inventory management. But it means that the secret of Worcestershire sauce is not really secret at all. It is a function of a specific fermented ingredient that is produced by other industrial food companies and supplied to Heinz. The uniqueness of Lea and Perrins' product is not the formula. It is the specific combination of sourced fermented fish concentrate, tamarind, vinegar, and secondary spice components, and the brand mystique that has been maintained for nearly 2 centuries. Worcestershire sauce was an accident. That part is real. The fermentation that transformed an inedible test batch into one of the most commercially successful condiments in history was genuinely unintended. But everything that followed the accident was deliberate. The trade dress protection strategy that fought counterfeit bottles in British and American courts. The origin mythology that attached the sauce to the colonial story of a returning British nobleman and a centuries-old Indian recipe. The trade secret cultivation that made the formula's secrecy a marketing asset worth more than the formula itself. The premium pricing that the mystique enabled. The Heinz acquisition that scaled the brand globally while preserving its heritage identity. The accidental discovery was a beginning. What the Lea and Perrins family built on top of that discovery, and what Heinz inherited and maintained, was a brand architecture of extraordinary durability. A product that is simultaneously one of the oldest commercial condiments in the English-speaking world and one that has never needed a significant reformulation, rebranding, or marketing reinvention in nearly 2 centuries. The orange wrap bottle in your kitchen is the product of an accident in a Worcester cellar, a colonial narrative that may or may not be accurately attributed, a century of aggressive trade dress litigation, a trade secret that is actually a sourced fermented fish concentrate, and a conglomerate acquisition by the same company that engineered the ketchup regulatory system. It tastes like history because it was built to taste like history. That construction was as deliberate as anything Heinz ever put in a bottle. Let us know in the comments what we should cover next. Thanks for watching.